Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested.
And it's Jeremy from Tested.
Welcome to Projections, our weekly show about virtual reality and augmented reality. And this week we're talking about what Microsoft is calling Windows Mixed Reality.
Immersive headsets. So they've had Windows Mixed Reality since HoloLens was announced.
Yes, and I guess that's the only reason you could actually call it Mixed Reality is because they have AR and VR products. But the WMR products, to be clear, they're VR headsets.
Yeah, these are the new ones that were released just last month in Microsoft stores across the country.
And along with the Windows 10 Fall Creators Update, which adds built-in support for their interface, we've been using two of their headsets. We have one from Acer and one from Lenovo. And there are also headsets made from companies like Dell, ASUS, Samsung has one that's slightly different.
Yeah. It's worth saying that all of the headsets are based off the same reference design that Microsoft provided to the manufacturers. And the manufacturers basically did their own industrial design around this reference. They're all almost exactly the same experience.
Yeah, so while you may read online that there are slight differences in terms of the field of view, for example, they're basically the same. Putting up the Acer headset close to your face or the Lenovo headset close to your face, the experience is identical. These headsets at least require plug-in headphones. They have the same type of head strap that you strap it into, that you mount to your head, and they have the exact same controllers.
The only outlier is the Samsung headset, which costs $50 more. It's a $500 headset, and it does have integrated audio and an integrated microphone and a slightly higher resolution screen, also an OLED screen, whereas these are all LCD.
Right, so one question you might have is how do these headsets, if this is all based on the same reference design, compare to something like the Oculus Rift or the HTC Vive? Now that we have, including PSVR, 4 major platforms in VR.
Where should we start?
Well, let's start talking about the technical aspects, right? I think that's what a lot of people care about. Resolution. Sure, these are 1440 by 1440 headsets on each eye.
Per eye. So how does that compare to the Oculus Rift or the Vive? Yeah,
so the Rift and the Vive have the same resolutions, which are per eye, 1080 wide by 1200 tall. And so you actually get a significant number more pixels on the Windows mixed reality headsets.
Right, and I did notice that. So we did a nice A/B comparison where we jumped into Space Pirate Trainer in both headsets, and just standing at the main screen where you're choosing your game and you see your loadout and all that, you can tell a big difference in pixel density. Whether you're looking at solid colors or text or anything in the screen, it just seems a little bit more solid. Whereas with the Rift, I feel like years from now, when we put the Rift back on, these first generation headsets, we're going to notice the lack of pixel density is going to be a big compromise.
And it's good that we talk about this in terms of experiential pixel density and not just absolute numbers, because the resolution is related to the field of view and related to how big the panels are and also what type of displays they are. For example, the Rift, the Vive, they use OLED panels, and those panels have a subpixel arrangement that they don't fill as much as RGB stripe, for example. So if you look at an image like a single color, a red image, a block of red text with your Oculus Rift, you may notice more screen door effect than you may notice with, if you look at that same image with an LCD with RGB stripe.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't say the screen door effect is necessarily gone with any headset we've ever seen.
Definitely not.
And we're hopefully one day, but it's definitely a little more solid with these headsets. That's one of the pros, I would say.
And that screen door effect is also mitigated by the type of optics you use. And the Rift uses a hybrid Fresnel lens, and so we've described it as maybe like a linen effect. You see almost like very thin vertical lines, parallel lines that mask that screen door. With these headsets, I think they're some type of a hybrid Fresnel lens as well. It does. I can make out that screen door effect a little bit more if I squint, even though there are more pixels and the pixel fill is pretty good.
Yeah, it's a different looking screen door effect. Like it's a triangular one,
right,
as opposed to the more linear one that the Rift appears with those optics.
Now, something else with these lenses, though, is the sweet spot.
Yeah, you know what? As I was comparing them, certainly the sweet spot on any headset is not as wide as we want. The sweet spot we're referring to is like the area that is within focus. So as you're looking straight ahead, how much do you actually see that is completely, resolves and in focus and not blurry? As you start to get to the edge of these lenses, you start to see what, we refer to as like God rays or blurriness.
And it affects two things. It affects how much your eye can move around, how much your eye can wander
Right.
and comfortably in a headset, and also how much fidgeting you might want to do with the headset to get your eyes in the center to begin with.
Yeah, like if we're looking around the world, even with our own eyes, like only a little bit is actually in focus, but we can dart our eyes in any direction and resolve anything within focus. With the lenses, you have to look straight ahead in order to get that focus. And I would say it's small. It is a small area of focus on the Windows Mixed Reality. It's also small on the Rift, but I feel like the Rift and the Vive degrade a little more subtly as you leave that area of of focus.
It becomes very clear when you have one of these headsets on that if you just keep your head straight and look even, I would say, 30 degrees off to any side, the image is going to get a little fuzzy, a little warped even.
Yeah.
And it's very noticeable in the Cliff House in the primary interface for Windows Mixed Reality.
I feel like we've almost buried one of the big leads about the headset, which is that it has inside-out tracking.
Yeah.
I feel like that's huge. I really do. I feel like this is a big leap forward for VR in general. From a setup standpoint, it's the easiest VR headset that I've set up that has any kind of 3-degree of freedom tracking. It is literally two cables. It is an HDMI and it's a USB 3, and it gets its power over that. And then all of the tracking is done through these two, like what I assume is a stereo cameras or an IR emitter and a camera. And it's actually quite good. I mean, you can, once it's all set up, and it doesn't take much to set it up. You basically look around for a moment, and then you set up your boundary. Same, just like the other guys, they have a Guardian type system where you walk your headset, not a controller, the headset around the room, and that establishes your borders, and then you're good to go. And it actually will remember the space. So if you put the headset back on, there's no worrying about, have I moved my sensors? There's nobody's going to trip over them and mess up your tracking.
And it's true 6 degrees of freedom, lateral movement. But something we couldn't do that we thought we could do was actually walk around completely with this.
Oh, like if you had a backpack computer or something.
Because it does recognize a limited space as your play area, which is a fairly big space. Like we tried this whole office. We couldn't, once we set up that Guardian system, that boundary system, and move the headset out of there, then it thinks it's out of your play space.
And what happens then?
Well, a lot of times it does work, but if you start it on, it'll just ask you to reset up the space again. Yeah.
I did like their Guardian system. Compared to the other guys, I think I might actually prefer it. It's not this huge grid that's there. And with the other guys, you can say how blatant do you want that grid to be. But with this one, it's just a big, quad. And then as you get closer to it with the controller of your headset, these concentric rings start to appear. And the closer you get, the more rings there are. So it's a good effect. It's a good trade-off between immersion and safety, I think.
Yeah. And then there's, of course, not only is the headset and the world track with this inside-out tracking system, but also the controllers.
Yeah.
And when we have the controllers here, you actually see the lights. They turn on. They're on the whole time. They're not invisible or masked or anything. And they actually make it pretty bright.
They have a visible flicker too. I feel like I can see them, flickering more than I expect to with lights.
There is somewhat controller parity, button parity between this and your Oculus Touch controller. They don't have capacitive sensors or anything, but you do have a trigger. It's an analog trigger. You have a grip button. You have both a thumbstick and a touchpad.
Kind of covered all the bases.
Yep, and then you have a menu button and also this Windows button that jumps you back into that Cliff House launcher that they have. But the ergonomics of the controller, I think they feel a little bit chintzy. They feel a little bit like this is more of a plastic toy as much as a well-designed controller device.
I agree with you. It's not the controller I would expect from the guys who made the 360 controller,
right?
Which is probably still my favorite gamepad controller, which is just robust, perfect feel, good weight. This is a reference design that they brand for everybody.
Yep.
But everyone appears to get the same controllers. Although I do think the Samsungs have a slightly slicker feel to them, the industrial design, the injection molding. But I agree with you. It doesn't have a whole lot of weight. The haptics aren't that strong, and the touchpad is very small.
Yeah. Touchpad is very small, especially when we're talking about using that as an analog for something like the Steam controller and the Vive controller touchpads. This is a poor imitation, I think, of that. But the tracking of the controller, it works.
Yeah, I mean it does. It works if your controllers are in front of you. Now this is the downside of inside-out tracking, is that this headset has to be able to see your controllers, and it does see beyond your peripheral view. So
your visual field
vision.
of view.
So I can't see the tracking get lost, but as it moves past that, my peripheral view, that's where it actually does get lost.
Yeah.
And that does become a factor. Like I was playing Space Pirate Trainer, and I was blocking with one, shield over here and shooting with this hand. And while I'm not sure that I got damaged or was shot more than I otherwise would, it's just distracting to see things snap back into place as I bring my hands back into view.
Because you're holding something that's supposed to be big.
It breaks the illusion.
And that breaks the illusion. You see shadows, of jumping shadows for your controller.
Yeah.
Not only is it not work for things that are outside your field of view, but things that are too close to your field of view, that also breaks the tracking as well. If you get the controller too close to your face, which I sometimes do when I'm like moving the headset, or adjusting it.
Right.
And so it's definitely not perfect. It's suitable for a large number of VR applications, as we've tried, but it's a step down.
The main thing if you have one of these headsets, you're going to see as soon as you start to use it is the Cliff House. Now that's the environment, that's the Windows environment that Microsoft has built that provides basically your user interface to everything else that you would otherwise do in Windows. And what struck me was that it feels so Microsoft, because every interface is just literally a two-dimensional panel that is basically a Windows interface.
Yeah.
And there's nothing warped around you. That they didn't use 3D or virtual reality. You can bring in objects, they call them holograms, which are models essentially, and place them around your space.
And that's in a library within one of their applications.
Yeah.
But they run static loops and
the storefront, it's like the edges everywhere.
Yeah,
it's definitely a very Microsoft solution to VR.
And it doesn't feel very, even though you can customize a little bit, like there's not a lot to do in there. It doesn't feel very interactive.
No, very little.
Like you can, yes, bring up a web page, and you can web browse if you want it. You can use your real keyboard, or you can type with a virtual keyboard. But I tried that, and just to try it, it kind of works. You can't even scroll well. You actually have to, for some windows, you actually have to laser point at the scroll bar to scroll.
I found I could grab the page as long as I didn't click something that was clickable and then swipe it off. Also, the touchpad seemed to work sometimes.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing for these is, basically for me, is the Steam support,
which launched this week, and that's why we're covering this week. Previously, just in the Windows Store, there were maybe a dozen VR things you can actually do.
Yeah.
A few games that were ported over, Arizona Sunshine, Space Pirate Trainer. But this week, the floodgates were open because Valve has built-in Windows mixed reality headset support. So you download in your Steam application, you download a separate Windows mixed reality program, a launcher. Run that.
Yeah, you don't even see it. It's some kind of a driver thing.
And then your SteamVR, all your applications just basically work, and they've mapped this controller to this controller.
Right. So every game, you will now see Vive controllers in your hand if it supports that kind of view.
Or you can see they have models for the Windows Mixed Reality controller in the Steam Home interface.
Right.
Yes. SteamVR Home interface. And like I said, there's button parity. So you have a trigger, you have the grip button. The touchpad is the only analog to the actual touchpad. Like if you have a Oculus touch controller, this one doesn't have a touchpad, so you use the thumbstick. And I actually like the thumbstick as a replacement, as an optional replacement for the Valve trackpad. For some cases, you can't use this thumbstick. This thumbstick is not accessible, at least right now, in SteamVR. And I wish you could actually use both, or for some games, it would make a lot of sense.
You do use the thumbstick for one thing, and that's to get back to Steam. So
yes.
To bring up your Steam interface.
Yep.
Normally on a Vive wand, you would use the Steam button, but this is the Microsoft button.
Right.
No. So you use the right hand and you click in the left analog stick. That brings up your Steam interface. Now what's interesting, if you do hit the Windows button, it brings you immediately back to Cliff House, which tells me it's running all the time in the background. And that's nice from a user experience standpoint. It warped right back in there. But it's an odd experience to get back into Steam. So the way that you launch Steam, unfortunately right now, and it's still in beta, I'm sure they'll improve this, but there is basically a window into your Windows desktop, and you use it just as you would a mouse and keyboard. You launch the SteamVR, you warp into SteamVR. If you go back to the Cliff House, there's a big blue box. It's a
It's like a windowed rectangle.
Again, very Microsoft. It's a Windows box that's a window on the desktop, and you just click that, and that's how you get back into it. Not terribly intuitive.
It seems completely just bootstrapped
Yeah.
and band-aided on, and not a well-integrated solution. And it's in those SteamVR experiences and games that we did notice some of the limitations of this headset and this inside-out tracking. Things you mentioned, like in Space Pirate Trainer, yeah, that's in both stores, and you saw that limitations. But like games like Onward or Killing Floor Incursion, games where you actually have to hold things in your chest, it didn't work well at all. I was trying to hold like a machine gun rifle, right?
You would have to look down.
I'd have to look down, grab it, and I hold it like this, and even when I hold it like this, it loses tracking.
Yeah.
And it starts floating away.
Well, that's the downside of the inside-out tracking. There are the conveniences and there's the compromises.
Yeah.
I mean, the nice thing is it does seem to run everything. It's not like games have to be recompiled.
There are some things where I ran into an issue where it looked like it said sensor not detected.
Oh,
Like
really?
Killing
Like
Floor,
from the beginning?
Yeah, yes.
Interesting.
Even though tracking was working well, it just needed that extra layer to say it's okay that you don't have Oculus cameras plugged in or Vive cameras or Vive projectors plugged in.
Interesting. I wonder if that's a matter of the developers looking for something that's too specific.
Yeah.
I played 11 VR tennis, and the controller actually maps well to a ping pong paddle. I was impressed by how well that felt. It played okay. The problem was I felt like I was getting some frame rate loss, which is something I don't experience with the Rift or the Vive in that game. And I started to wonder, is that because the Cliff House is also running in the background? I mean, that's a 3D environment with sound and a whole lot going on.
And it's also a high resolution display that you're rendering it. It's pushing a few
It is
more
a higher
pixels
resolution
out.
display. It's a good point. Yeah.
But all in all, I mean, the experiences are good. Like I would still, if I had all three headsets out here, I'm still gonna pick, the Vive or the Rift to play most of those games. But you get, I'd say, 90% of the experiences with the Windows Mixed Reality headsets, and a little bit better pixel density, and the ease of setup, I think, is undeniable. 2 ports to plug in. I mean, I was surprised when I opened the box. I thought I was missing things, but
Exactly.
it was just the controllers, the headset, super simple to plug in. If you unplug it and plug it back in, it just works. The drivers are perfect. And comfort-wise, I actually like the comfort of this design. It reminds me of that PSVR design. And I thought it was very comfortable, very lightweight.
Well, it's worth pointing out there is no integrated audio, and that's a huge selling point for the Rift for me, or the Vive with the Pro Audio strap.
Yeah.
I think that's huge. And the Samsung, if you're talking about Windows Mixed Reality. So I would need that. Like at this point, the convenience of taking one thing on and off is essential to me. If I were considering Windows Mixed Reality, I would look at the Samsung device. But that's $100 more than the Rift, and the controllers on the Rift are my favorite controllers of all the VR headsets. So it's kind of a mixed bag. As you said, the ease of setup as well as the ease of tearing down. So like if you're a portable VR person, this is hard to beat. It really is.
Yeah, and also one thing this has that the other headsets don't have, the ability to flip up the HMD. So you can actually go back to your keyboard, use your keyboard mouse, and then flip this back in.
Yeah, that's convenient. Not all of them have that. That is one of the nice things about the Lenovo and the Acer.
We're already, I think, a couple weeks into the launch of these headsets, and coming up, there are some sales for Black Friday, and Microsoft is going to be discounting in the US, I think, $100 off these headsets. That makes it a pretty compelling price point when you're talking about that $300, $350 range for something that's complete. But if you can afford it, I would still go pay $400 for the Rift.
Yeah, I would too. However, if it's the VR headset you're given for Christmas, or if it's the one you can afford,
throw it back in their face.
No. Honestly, I feel like this is okay. Like this is a decent outing into VR, and if it's what gets you into VR, great. The resolution is better than the other two major players, and the inside-out tracking is, while it has limitations, it's also very easy to set up.
They really needed that SteamVR integration. I think without that SteamVR integration that they launched this week, this would be dead on arrival.
Absolutely, and I'm glad they did it. I mean, Microsoft, who knows? Like, you have to buy everything through the Microsoft Store. They could have said that.
I mean, what it really feels like is that this is not a full-hearted attempt into VR. The same way that Valve, HTC, and Oculus have not only developed specialized hardware, but also invested in content. It feel like Microsoft wants to put their foot in the door in VR and and maybe build towards something in the future, but it doesn't feel like this is all in VR.
The fact that they call it mixed reality tells me there's more coming. I mean, the HoloLens is a very expensive developer, basically a developer kit now. That's going to trickle down, and we're going to see things that really are mixed reality coming from all the players, including Microsoft. And I'm glad everyone's invested in this because this is a very, very interesting, forward-looking space.
All right, well, that's our look into the Windows mixed reality headsets as they stand today. The one that we haven't used is the Samsung Odyssey HMD, which is high resolution, a little better OLED screen, maybe more comfortable controllers, but we're looking for that in the future. If you have questions about the Windows mixed reality headset experience, please place them in the comments below and we'll try to answer them as best as possible. But otherwise, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.